June 12, 2025 started like any other day in Ahmedabad, India. The sun rose over the bustling city of 5.6 million people, the commercial heart of Gujarat state. At Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport, hundreds of passengers prepared for their journeys. Among them were two brothers, Vikram and Rajesh Mehta, both British nationals of Indian origin. Vikram was 40 years old, a family man living in London with his wife and young son. His older brother Rajesh, 45, had been his constant companion since childhood. The brothers had just spent several wonderful weeks visiting their family in India, reconnecting with relatives, sharing meals, and creating memories. Now it was time to return home to the United Kingdom. They had booked seats on premium Airlines Flight PA171, scheduled to depart at 1:38 p.m. local time, bound for London Gatwick Airport. It was supposed to be a routine 10-hour flight across continents. Vikram had been assigned seat 11A, a window seat on the left side of the aircraft, right next to an emergency exit. His brother Rajesh was seated just a few rows behind him. Neither brother could have imagined that in less than 2 hours, their lives would be forever changed. The Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, waiting on the tarmac, was a modern marvel of engineering. This particular aircraft had been in service since 2014, accumulating 41,868 flight hours. It had an impeccable safety record. In fact, no Boeing 787 had ever been involved in a fatal crash since the model entered service in 2011. The crew was experienced and professional. Captain Sharma, with 15,600 flight hours under his belt, had nearly 8,600 hours specifically on the 787. His co-pilot had logged 1,100 hours of flying experience. Together with 10 flight attendants, they prepared to safely transport 230 passengers across the world. As passengers boarded, the cabin buzzed with the familiar sounds of travel, luggage being stowed, seatbelts clicking, children's excited chatter about the journey ahead. Among the 242 souls on board were 169 Indian nationals, 53 British citizens, 7 Portuguese passengers, and 1 Canadian. 13 children were traveling that day, including 2 infants. Some passengers were returning home after visiting family, like the Mehta brothers. Others were embarking on business trips or vacations. In the medical college hostel adjacent to the airport, young medical students were going about their daily routines. Some were studying in their rooms. Others were eating lunch in the dining area. They had no idea that in moments, their lives would intersect with Flight PA171 in the most tragic way imaginable. At 1:38 p.m., the tower cleared Flight PA171 for takeoff. The massive engines of the Boeing 787 roared to life, generating 64,000 pounds of thrust. The aircraft began its acceleration down the runway, picking up speed. Inside the cabin, passengers settled into their seats, some reading, others dozing off, many looking forward to landing in London that evening. Vikram Mehta gazed out the window from seat 11A, watching the ground begin to fall away as the nose of the aircraft lifted. The wheels left the runway. They were airborne. Everything seemed normal. For 30 seconds, everything was perfectly routine, and then, in an instant, everything changed. 30 seconds into the flight, Vikram heard something that made his blood run cold. A loud noise. Not the normal sound of engines or air rushing past the fuselage. This was different, wrong, terrifying. There was a loud noise, he would later recall, and then everything happened so quickly. Inside the cockpit, Captain Sharma and his co-pilot suddenly faced every pilot's nightmare. Warning lights flashed. Alarms blared. Something was catastrophically wrong with the aircraft. The plane had reached a maximum altitude of just 625 feet, barely higher than a 40-story building, when it began to lose altitude. The captain transmitted a Mayday call, the universal distress signal that means, "Help me, I'm in grave danger." It was the last communication the tower would receive from Flight PA171. Flight tracking data shows the aircraft traveled southwest from the airport for a short distance before all signals stopped. The massive Boeing 787, fully loaded with fuel for a 10-hour transatlantic flight, was now plummeting toward the Earth. Inside the cabin, passengers experienced something no one should ever have to endure. Vikram later described how it felt like the plane came to a standstill for 5 to 10 seconds, in midair. Green and white lights flashed throughout the cabin. The aircraft's nose was pitched up, but it wasn't climbing. It wasn't responding. It was falling. Passengers screamed. Some prayed. Others grabbed the hands of loved ones, knowing in that terrible moment what was about to happen. Vikram thought of his wife and son back in London. He thought of his brother Rajesh, seated just rows away. He thought, I am going to die. The Boeing 787 struck the ground with devastating force at 1:39 p.m., just 32 seconds after takeoff. But it didn't hit empty ground. The aircraft crashed directly into the hostel building of the BJ Medical College, 1.7 kilometers from the runway where it had just lifted off. The impact was catastrophic. The aircraft, moving at high speed and filled with 125,000 liters of jet fuel, disintegrated on contact. Metal tore, windows shattered, the fuselage split apart, and then came the fire. The jet fuel ignited instantly, creating a massive fireball that engulfed the wreckage and surrounding buildings. Flames shot hundreds of feet into the air. Thick black smoke billowed up, visible from miles away. The temperature at the crash site reached levels so extreme that India's Home Minister would later state there was no chance of rescuing anyone. The force of the impact and subsequent explosion destroyed multiple buildings. The medical college hostel where students lived and studied bore the brunt of the devastation. Walls collapsed. Floors caved in. Fire raced through corridors. Young medical students who had been eating lunch, studying in their rooms, or socializing with friends were killed instantly. Others were trapped under debris, screaming for help as flames closed in. Emergency services received the call at 1:40 p.m. Firefighters, paramedics, police, and military personnel rushed to the scene. What they found was a vision of hell. Wreckage was scattered across a wide area. Parts of the aircraft had embedded themselves in buildings. The tail section stood grotesquely upright amidst the rubble, and everywhere there was fire. Flames consumed everything: metal, concrete, and human beings. First responders did everything they could, but the inferno was too intense. They fought to control the blaze, to reach any possible survivors, but the heat drove them back again and again. As firefighters battled the flames and emergency workers began the grim task of searching through the wreckage, no one expected to find survivors. Initial reports stated that everyone on board had perished. The crash site was too devastated, the fire too intense, the impact too violent. But then, something miraculous happened. A figure emerged from the smoke. A man, covered in blood and soot, his white shirt stained red, was walking away from the wreckage. He was limping, clearly injured, but he was alive. He was walking. Witnesses couldn't believe what they were seeing. Someone had survived. Local residents rushed to help him. One grabbed him and guided him toward approaching ambulances. Someone grabbed hold of me and put me in an ambulance, Vikram would later remember. He was rushed to the civil hospital in Ahmedabad, the same facility where victims' bodies would soon arrive by the dozens. When Vikram was brought to the emergency room, Dr. Patel examined him with a mixture of professional concern and profound disbelief. How was this man alive? The doctor found that Vikram had suffered impact injuries to his chest, eyes, and feet. His left hand had severe burn injuries. Blood matted his hair and ran down his face, but he was conscious. He was breathing. He was alive. He was disoriented with multiple injuries all over his body, Dr. Patel told reporters, but he seems to be out of danger. As medical staff treated his wounds, Vikram's mind was in chaos. He couldn't process what had just happened. One moment he was on a plane, the next he was surrounded by flames and bodies. He didn't understand how he had survived. As news of the crash spread across India and around the world, Vikram's family received the notification every family member dreads. Their loved ones were on the crashed flight. His wife in London went numb with shock. His elderly parents couldn't comprehend what they were hearing. His brother's family waited desperately for news. And then, incredibly, Vikram's phone worked. From his hospital bed, still in shock and barely able to process his own survival, he video called his father. Can you imagine that conversation? A father answers his phone, expecting to hear his son is dead, and instead sees his face, injured, traumatized, but alive. The plane crashed, Vikram told his father, his voice shaking. I don't know where Rajesh is. I don't see any other passengers. I don't know how I'm alive. I don't know how I exited the plane. His cousin in Leicester, England, received a similar call. He only said that he's fine, nothing else, the cousin later told reporters. The family was overwhelmed with conflicting emotions. Profound relief that Vikram had survived, but crushing grief and uncertainty about Rajesh. The next day, June 13th, India's Prime Minister visited the crash site to pay his respects. He also made a special visit to the civil hospital to meet Vikram, the miracle survivor. The Home Minister had visited the day before. Vikram's survival had captured the world's attention. News outlets across the globe carried his story. How did one man survive when 241 others did not? What made his position in the aircraft special? Was it pure luck, divine intervention, or something else? Investigators, aviation experts, and the public all wanted to understand the impossible. To understand Vikram's miraculous survival, we need to examine where he was sitting. Seat 11A. This wasn't just any seat. It was a window seat on the left side of the Boeing 787, positioned right next to an emergency exit. It was in the forward section of the cabin, with some open space in front of it. Aviation experts immediately focused on this detail. Ron Barch, chairman of Avlaw Aviation Consulting, explained to Reuters, Seat 11A was obviously the safest seat in this particular instance because he was adjacent to the emergency exit, but it's not always 11A. It's just 11A on this configuration of the Boeing 787. The proximity to the emergency exit proved to be the critical factor. When the aircraft impacted the building, it didn't remain intact. The massive forces involved caused the fuselage to break apart. Different sections of the aircraft hit different parts of the structure. Here's what happened in those crucial milliseconds. The side of the aircraft where Vikram was seated, the left side, forward section, crashed into the ground floor of the medical college hostel. The impact broke the aircraft apart, but in that specific location there was space. While other sections of the plane were crushed, burned, or trapped in collapsed structures, the area around Seat 11A created a survival pocket. The emergency exit door that Vikram sat next to broke open on impact. Instead of being trapped inside a burning, crumpled fuselage, Vikram suddenly found himself with a way out. When the door broke, I saw that space and I just jumped out, he explained. The door must have broken on impact. There was a wall on the opposite side, but near me, it was open. But proximity to an exit alone doesn't guarantee survival in such a catastrophic crash. Multiple factors had to align perfectly. First, Vikram remained conscious after the impact. Many passengers likely died instantly from the force of the crash or were knocked unconscious. Vikram, though injured and disoriented, was awake and aware. Second, he wasn't pinned or trapped. In aircraft crashes, passengers are often crushed by collapsing structures, trapped under debris, or restrained by damaged seatbelts and seats. Vikram was able to move. Third, he acted quickly. Despite his injuries, despite the shock and terror of the situation, despite being surrounded by flames and bodies, Vikram unfastened his seatbelt and forced himself to move toward the opening. When I opened my eyes, I realized I was alive, he said. I tried to unbuckle myself from the seat and escape. Fourth, the fire hadn't yet fully engulfed his section of the aircraft. The jet fuel explosion was instant and massive, but in the first few seconds after impact, before the fire spread through the entire wreckage, there was a brief window of opportunity. Vikram was in the right place at the right moment to use that window. And fifth, perhaps most importantly, there was somewhere to go. The broken emergency exit opened onto the ground floor of the building, not a collapsed or burning section. There was space, literal physical space, that allowed him to escape. David Susi, a CNN safety analyst and former FAA inspector, expressed shock that anyone in that part of the plane could survive. That seat is right where the spar of the wing would go under, and it would be a solid place for the aircraft to hit the ground. But as far as survivability above it, that is incredibly surprising. Yet Vikram did survive. He stood up, saw the opening, and moved toward it. When I got up, there were bodies all around me, he recalled. I was scared. I stood up and ran. There were pieces of the plane all around me. As Vikram recovered in the hospital over the following days, the full scale of the tragedy became clear. All 12 crew members had perished. 229 of the 230 passengers were dead. On the ground, 19 people were killed, mostly medical students who were in the hostel when the plane struck. At least 67 others on the ground were seriously injured. The total death toll stood at 260 lives lost. Families from around the world descended on Ahmedabad, from India, the United Kingdom, Portugal, Canada. They came seeking answers, seeking closure, seeking the bodies of their loved ones. The identification process was heartbreaking. The intense heat from the burning fuel had left many bodies, charred beyond recognition, according to medical officials. DNA testing had to be used to identify victims. More than 150 bodies were eventually returned to families, but the process took weeks. Funerals were held across India and internationally. While Vikram lay in his hospital bed, his worst fears about his brother were confirmed. Rajesh had not survived. His body was identified among the victims. The joy of Vikram's survival was tempered by the crushing grief of losing his brother. On June 17th, just 5 days after the crash, Vikram was released from the hospital. His physical injuries were healing, but his emotional trauma was just beginning. The next day, June 18th, Vikram attended his brother's funeral in the town of Diu. Photographs show him, bandages still on his face from cuts and bruises, helping to carry Rajesh's coffin. The man who had miraculously survived was now laying his beloved brother to rest. Family members who spoke to the press described Vikram's mental state as fragile. "He can't sleep at night," one relative said in July. "He sleeps, but doesn't sleep properly." Another explained that Vikram was haunted by what he'd seen and experienced. As the weeks turned into months, Vikram's physical recovery progressed, but his emotional healing lagged behind. By September, 3 months after the crash, he was still in India, still receiving treatment, still processing the trauma. His wife had returned to the United Kingdom with their young son for the start of the school year. "He understands but still misses his dad," she told reporters, speaking about their son. She added that she wasn't sure when Vikram would be able to return home. The psychological weight of being the sole survivor is a burden few can understand. Vikram was alive, but 241 others were not. Why had he survived when everyone else died? Did he deserve to live when so many others, including his own brother, had perished? This is known as survivor's guilt, and it can be as debilitating as any physical injury. Meanwhile, investigations into the cause of the crash proceeded. India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau led the probe, with assistance from the United States National Transportation Safety Board and the United Kingdom Air Accidents Investigation Branch. Boeing sent a team of experts to examine the wreckage. The aircraft's 2 black boxes, the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, were recovered and analyzed. On July 12, 2025, a preliminary report was released. While the full investigation would take years, initial findings suggested the crash was not caused by a fundamental design flaw in the Boeing 787. The report did not identify any mechanical faults with the aircraft or its engines, nor did it recommend any immediate safety actions for operators of 787s. The investigation would continue, but early indications pointed to a complex set of factors that investigators were still working to fully understand. The crash of Flight PA171 sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. This was the first fatal crash involving a Boeing 787 Dreamliner since the aircraft type entered service in 2011. Over 1,000 Boeing 787s were operating globally, and suddenly questions arose about the safety of the fleet. Premium Airlines immediately suspended 83 wide-body flights for 6 weeks to perform government-mandated safety inspections on its entire Boeing 787 fleet. Out of 33 aircraft, inspections have been completed on 26, and these have been cleared for service, the airline announced in a statement. The airline also retired flight number PA171 and its reciprocal flight number, as is customary after a major crash. The route from Ahmedabad to London was eventually resumed, but under different flight numbers. Boeing's reputation, already damaged by previous incidents with its 737 MAX aircraft, took another hit. The company's stock price sank almost 9% in pre-market trading following the crash. CEO Kelly Ortberg canceled his plans to attend the Paris Air Show to focus on the crisis. However, as the preliminary investigation results came in, suggesting no systemic flaw with the 787 design, Boeing's stock began to recover. By July 14th, it had risen over 13% from its post-crash low. The crash reignited debates about aviation safety. How could such a catastrophic failure occur just seconds after takeoff? What warning signs, if any, had been missed? Could anything have been done differently? Aviation experts emphasize that air travel remains statistically one of the safest forms of transportation. But they also acknowledged that when accidents do occur, they can be devastating. For the families of the victims, statistics and safety records meant nothing. They had lost mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, brothers, sisters, friends. One family in Mumbai lost 4 members in the crash. Imtiaz Ali Syed's brother Javed, along with his sister-in-law, nephew, and niece, had all been on flight PA171. They had been visiting India from their home in London to see Javed's sick mother and celebrate Eid al-Adha. It was the first time in 15 years that all of us siblings were together, Syed told reporters, his voice breaking with emotion. Now he was burying 4 family members at once. Memorials were held around the world. In India, the government declared a national day of mourning. In the United Kingdom, King Charles III requested that senior royals wear black armbands and observe a minute of silence at the Trooping the Color ceremony on June 14th. World leaders expressed their condolences. French President Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Canadian Prime Minister, and many others sent messages of sympathy. But words, however heartfelt, could not bring back the dead. The BJ Medical College in Ahmedabad, where the plane had crashed, suffered enormous damage. Several buildings were destroyed or severely damaged. The hostel where students had lived was gone. The families of the young medical students killed on the ground grieved alongside the families of those who had been on the plane. These students had dedicated their lives to healing others, and they had died in an instant through no fault of their own. The college eventually established a memorial on the crash site, honoring both the victims on the plane and those on the ground. It stands as a permanent reminder of the tragedy that occurred on June 12, 2025. As the first anniversary of the crash approaches, the aviation industry continues to learn from the tragedy. While the final investigation report may take years to complete, preliminary findings have led to several safety reviews and procedure updates. Airlines around the world have reviewed their emergency response protocols. Training for flight crews has been enhanced. Maintenance procedures have been scrutinized, and in some cases, strengthened. The goal is to ensure that whatever factors contributed to the crash of flight PA171 never combine in the same way again. But perhaps the most important lessons are not technical, but human. The story of Vikram Mehta reminds us of the fragility of life and the randomness of fate. Why did he survive when 241 others did not? Why did the aircraft break apart in such a way that created a survival pocket precisely where he was sitting? Why did the emergency exit near his seat break open instead of remaining jammed shut? There are no satisfying answers to these questions. Sometimes survival comes down to factors beyond our control. Being in the right place at the right millisecond, the aircraft fracturing in one way rather than another, a door breaking open instead of staying closed. Aviation experts stress that there is no such thing as a universally safest seat on an aircraft. Every crash is different. In some accidents, the rear of the plane is the safest area. In others, the front. In still others, no area is safe. Mitchell Fox, a director at the Flight Safety Foundation, stated, "Each accident is different, and it is impossible to predict survivability based on seat location." What we can learn, however, is the importance of being aware of our surroundings when we fly. Know where your nearest exit is. Understand how your seatbelt works. Pay attention to the safety briefing, even if you've heard it 100 times before. In an emergency, seconds matter. Vikram survived in part because he was conscious, able to move, and knew there was an exit right next to him. He acted quickly in the brief window of opportunity he had. These factors, combined with luck, saved his life. For Vikram himself, the journey toward healing continues. Physical scars fade with time, but psychological wounds can last a lifetime. He must live with the memories of that terrible day, the sound of the crash, the sight of flames and bodies, the knowledge that he survived when everyone around him, including his beloved brother, did not. Survivor's guilt is real and can be crippling. Mental health professionals emphasize the importance of counseling and support for survivors of traumatic events. Vikram will need time, professional help, and the love of his family to process what happened and find a way to move forward with his life. He has a wife who loves him and a young son who needs his father. They are his reason to keep going, to keep healing, to honor the memory of his brother and all those who died by living his life as fully as possible. "I don't know how I survived," Vikram said from his hospital bed in those first days after the crash. "For some time I thought I was also going to die. But when I opened my eyes, I realized I was alive." Those words, "I realized I was alive," carry enormous weight. In the midst of unimaginable tragedy, surrounded by death and destruction, one man opened his eyes and realized he had been given a second chance. What he does with that second chance, how he honors the memory of those who died, and how he heals from his trauma will be his journey to make. The crash of Flight PA171 was the deadliest aviation disaster of the 2020s. 260 lives were lost in those terrible 32 seconds. Families were destroyed, dreams were ended, futures were stolen. And yet, amidst all that death and devastation, one man survived. Vikram Mehta's survival doesn't diminish the tragedy, it amplifies it. For every life lost, there were families left behind, just like his. For every person who died, there were dreams unfulfilled, just like his brother's. But his survival also reminds us that even in the darkest moments, even when all hope seems lost, miracles can happen. Life is precious and fragile. We don't know how much time we have. The passengers and crew of Flight PA171 boarded a plane, expecting to land safely in London hours later. They never made it. So cherish the people you love. Tell them how much they mean to you. Don't take a single day for granted. And the next time you board a plane, remember Vikram's story. Remember seat 11A. Remember that awareness, quick thinking, and yes, a measure of luck can make the difference between life and death. Thank you for watching this video. I'd like to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about this incredible story? How do you think you would cope with being the sole survivor of such a tragedy? And what lessons can we all learn from what happened on that terrible day in June 2025? If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories of survival and resilience. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.